Gerald Anderson was not a man easily moved by emotion. At 35, he had seen the ruthless side of love, manipulation, betrayal, and empty promises. As the CEO of Anderson Holdings, one of Lagos's most prestigious investment firms, Gerald had built his empire on discipline, loyalty, and precision. And yet, for all his achievements, he remained a man in search of something tender, something grounding, something he used to see in the way his late father looked at his mother. Then came Vanessa Odibi. He met her at a luxury charity auction hosted at the Civic Center. She had walked into the event draped in champagne satin, her skin glowing like bronze under the chandeliers, laughter spilling from her lips like champagne bubbles. She had a presence that could silence a room, and Gerald, against every instinct, had been captivated. Vanessa was everything society adored: elegant, poised, effortlessly photogenic. As a top-tier fashion influencer with millions of followers, she was constantly invited to the most exclusive events, flown across the globe for luxury campaigns. She had taste. She had beauty. But Gerald believed, more than anything, that she had heart. For months he courted her, like the gentleman his mother had raised him to be. He took her to the opera, to private gallery showings, to fine dining experiences along the Lagos Marina. He remembered the first time she called him Jerry, her voice low and sultry, as they dined on the rooftop of the Azure Lounge. It felt like the walls he had built over years of disappointment had started to crumble. "I'm not like other women," she had said softly, staring at him through long lashes. He believed her. In those early days, Gerald ignored the subtle warnings. Like the way Vanessa never said thank you to the waitstaff, or how she referred to his business associates as boring old men, or how she barely asked about his day but expected him to memorize every detail of hers. At first he rationalized it. She was modern, strong, self-driven. She didn't have time for small gestures. She was simply focused. But soon her extravagance became unmissable. Vanessa spent money like it had no origin. Each week, parcels arrived from Europe: designer gowns, shoes, silk robes, limited edition handbags. She insisted on redecorating the Banana Island penthouse he had spent years designing with a top Italian architect. "Your taste is too minimal," she said, frowning at a bespoke furniture piece. "People should walk in and know we're powerful." Gerald had handed her the design budget, willing to let her make their space feel like home. But deep down, he had felt the first pang of unease. Something felt hollow. She didn't ask for input, didn't care if he liked the changes. Then came the private jet incident. Vanessa had demanded a plane to take her and two of her friends to Cape Town for a content weekend. "It's exposure for you," she had reasoned. "People will see I'm dating someone who owns a fleet." When Gerald hesitated, she pouted. "You can't put a price tag on love, Jerry. Unless, are you saying no because you don't believe in us?" He had caved. But love wasn't about jets or diamond-studded vanity mirrors. Gerald began to feel like he was dating a brand, not a person, a walking PR campaign, and worse, he felt emotionally disposable. She never remembered his board meeting dates. When he got back from a grueling trip to London for investor talks, she barely looked up from her phone. When he was quiet, she never asked why. When he tried to talk about his father's death anniversary, she changed the subject to a shoot she had booked in Morocco. The final push came from someone who had always seen through the glitter. Madame Gloria, Gerald's mother, watched from the sidelines with increasing concern. A retired philanthropist and once a business strategist in her own right, Gloria had never been one to speak unless necessary. She had watched as her son poured everything, time, money, heart, into Vanessa. She had tried to connect with the younger woman. One Sunday afternoon over tea, Gloria gently brought up her love for art and asked Vanessa if she enjoyed painting. Vanessa blinked slowly and said, "Oh no, I'm too busy building my brand to waste time on hobbies." Gloria smiled politely, but her eyes cooled. "She doesn't know your silence, Gerald," Gloria said one evening, after Vanessa had rushed out to attend an influencer's dinner, leaving a half-eaten meal on the table. "She doesn't know how your shoulders rise when you're stressed, or that you only eat slowly when you're troubled. She just shows love differently, Mom." Gerald replied quietly. No, Gloria said softly. She shows performance, not love. Still, Gerald defended Vanessa. Love, he believed, could grow. Maybe she was rough around the edges. Maybe she hadn't been taught how to care for others. He could teach her. He could shape her. But he was wrong. And Gloria, wise and patient, knew there was only one way to open her son's eyes, let the truth reveal itself. And fate, as it often does, prepared the stage in the most unexpected way. It was a Friday morning in Banana Island, and the streets were unusually busy. Between the construction of a new French bakery and an influencer-hosted brunch at Maison Amour, the entire neighborhood buzzed with idle luxury. Vanessa Odibi had just wrapped a lifestyle shoot on the steps of her penthouse, dressed in an ivory two-piece and nude heels, her curls flowing like silk under the subtle breeze. Her phone buzzed constantly, brand endorsements, comments, ad placements. She was on the rise, the face of elegance. But elegance, it seemed, was only skin deep. Vanessa strutted down the paved walkway, on her way to Delight Company, her favorite patisserie. She wore a gold tote bag worth more than most people's annual salary, and sunglasses the size of small saucers. Her assistant Nina trailed behind her, holding a water bottle and portable fan. A frail elderly woman, hunched beneath a sun hat with fraying edges, sat near the glass storefront of the patisserie. She looked out of place among the white stone pillars and ambient jazz. Her wrapper was faded, her sandals worn. A small basket of cola nuts, bananas, and roasted groundnuts lay by her feet. As Vanessa passed, the woman looked up and softly said, "My daughter, please, anything to eat?" Vanessa froze. At first, she simply blinked at the woman in disbelief, as though confused by her presence. Then came the disgust, the curling lip, the flared nostrils. She turned sharply to Nina. "Why is she here? This is Banana Island. She doesn't belong here." The old woman slowly lifted her basket. "Please, I have not eaten today." Vanessa stepped back as though the air itself had turned foul. "Don't come near me." A small group of onlookers had begun to watch, including two ladies on their morning walk and a delivery man stepping out of a van. Vanessa's voice rose, slicing the peaceful morning like glass. "Someone remove her. I'm not going to be harassed by roadside women pretending to be pitiful. This is private property." The old woman said nothing more, just looked up with tired eyes, blinking slowly. That was when Vanessa, either out of fury or performance, lifted her foot and kicked the woman's basket away. Ground nuts rolled across the walkway. The bananas tumbled onto the concrete. The woman gasped, grabbing her side as she fell partially over her stool. Gasps erupted around them. "Did she just... She kicked her?" Phones came out. Someone started recording. "Are you mad?" Vanessa shouted. "Do you know who I am?" But she had already lost the moment. The delivery man rushed to help the woman, whispering words of comfort. One of the women on her walk bent down beside the old beggar, handing her a bottle of water. Vanessa scoffed, tossed her hair, and muttered, "This is why I can't stand Lagos sometimes," before storming inside the patisserie. The old woman remained on the ground for a few moments longer, breathing slowly, her face calm. The fall had hurt, but not as much as the truth behind it. Because the woman who had just been humiliated wasn't some random stranger. She was Madame Gloria Anderson, Gerald Anderson's mother. And everything that had just happened was exactly what she needed to see with her own eyes. 2 weeks earlier, Gloria had returned to Lagos quietly. After years of being hidden away in Europe following her kidnapping and the trauma that followed, she had decided to come home. But not with an entourage, not with media coverage. She wanted to return in silence, observing the world her son had built in her absence. And she didn't like what she saw. She had asked Gerald about Vanessa. He had spoken of her with reverence, how intelligent she was, how ambitious, how misunderstood. Gloria had listened, nodding slowly, but something hadn't felt right. So she had made a decision. She would shed her silk robes and designer heels. She would tie her wrapper, wear old sandals, and take a seat on the same streets her foundation once served. If Vanessa was truly worthy, it would show in how she treated those without power. But now the truth had unfolded plainly. In full view of strangers, in the sharp sting of a kick and the utter absence of remorse. Gloria had hoped, deeply, that she would be proven wrong. She wasn't. That evening, Gerald arrived at his private residence in Victoria Island, unaware of what had transpired. He looked exhausted, his tie loosened, eyes shadowed from back-to-back meetings. Gloria was waiting in the sunroom. She had changed into a soft cashmere robe. The bruises from her fall were faint but visible, subtle reminders of the mask she had worn, and the mask Vanessa had dropped. Gerald rushed to her. "Mom, I thought you were still in Italy." "I came home early," she said simply, hugging him. He noticed her wrist, darkened slightly. "What happened?" Gloria smiled faintly. "I was kicked today, Jerry." "What? By who?" She looked him directly in the eyes. "By your fiancé." Silence, cold, immediate. "No," Gerald said softly. "Yes." Gloria handed him a phone. A video was already playing. Gerald watched as Vanessa's image filled the screen, his Vanessa, shouting, kicking, sneering. There was no doubt, no confusion. The truth was in the clarity of her actions. When the video ended, Gerald remained frozen. "She didn't know," he said after a long pause. "She didn't care," Gloria replied. Gerald Anderson sat in the dim glow of his private study, the city lights of Lagos bleeding through the glass walls behind him. The video still played in his mind. Vanessa's voice sharp, her foot lashing out, the sickening clatter of the old woman's basket hitting the pavement. Except that wasn't just any old woman. That was his mother. His heart pounded in his chest like a war drum. He felt embarrassed, betrayed, but most of all, foolish. He had defended Vanessa for so long. Every complaint, every whispered warning from close friends or even colleagues, he had shut them all down. Love had made him blind, and now reality had driven a knife into that blindness and split it open. He rose from the armchair, straightened his collar, and took a long breath. It was time to confront the woman he thought he'd spend forever with. Vanessa Odibi was lounging on the pool deck of Gerald's penthouse, wrapped in a silk robe, phone in hand, sipping from a tall glass of imported coconut water. Her freshly done nails glistened under the sun. She had just finalized a luxury skincare deal and was waiting for Gerald to come home so they could celebrate. When she heard the front door open, she smiled and called out, "Jerry, you're home early. You wouldn't believe what happened today. Sit down." Gerald's voice was different, cold, measured, the kind of tone he used when firing a board member who'd betrayed company ethics. Vanessa blinked. "Excuse me?" "I said sit down." She lowered herself slowly onto the white lounger, eyeing him warily. He stepped closer, holding out his phone. The video began to play. Again. Vanessa's voice echoed from the speakers. "Don't come near me. This is Banana Island. Move!" And the kick. The silence that followed was deafening. Vanessa's smile faded. "Why are you showing me this?" she asked, trying not to sound bored. "That woman," Gerald said, his voice hollow, "is my mother." Vanessa laughed, at first, a nervous, faltering laugh. "Wait, what? That old beggar? That's not funny, Gerald. It's not a joke." His eyes were dark now, quiet, dangerous. "She returned to Nigeria weeks ago without telling anyone. She wanted to observe you, to see the woman I've been defending, financing, and planning to marry. That's how she found out who you truly are. So did the rest of the world." Vanessa's mouth opened and closed, no words forming. Her face drained of color. "I didn't know," she finally whispered. "How could I have known?" "That's the point, Vanessa," Gerald snapped. "You didn't care to know. You kicked an elderly woman simply because she disrupted your aesthetic. You humiliated her in public like she was beneath your shoes. I didn't know she was your mother. And if she wasn't, would your actions be justified?" Silence. Gerald shook his head slowly. "I wanted to believe there was love between us. I turned away from every red flag. I made excuses for your selfishness, your disregard for people, your obsession with image. I kept telling myself you just needed time to grow. Tears began to form in Vanessa's eyes, but even now they felt misplaced. Not of remorse, but fear of what she was about to lose. I love you, she whispered. No, you don't, Gerald said firmly. You love my money, you love my last name, you love the access, the privilege, the illusion. He walked to the edge of the pool, breathing hard. You didn't even ask me how I was doing the day I returned from my father's memorial. Do you remember that? I sat next to you in silence for hours. You posted 2 photos, took a nap, and went out for drinks. I kept waiting, thinking maybe tomorrow you'd say something. I was planning to. He turned. No, you weren't. Because you don't see me, Vanessa. You see opportunity. The words hung in the air. Vanessa slowly stood, wrapping her robe tighter. So what now? I'm calling off the engagement, Gerald said. You'll leave my house today. Any brand partnerships that were tied to my firm will be severed, and I will make a formal apology on behalf of the Anderson family for the incident involving my mother. Vanessa's lower lip trembled. You can't do this, Gerald. People are watching us. They think we're a power couple. We're not a couple, he said quietly. We're a warning. That afternoon, Vanessa left the penthouse without her usual entourage. No camera flashes followed her this time. The same brands that had once begged her to represent them began quietly pulling away. The video had spread like wildfire. Public opinion turned quickly. The apology Gerald posted on social media went viral for its grace and its honesty. And Madame Gloria? She didn't celebrate. She didn't gloat. She simply sat at her estate, sipping hibiscus tea, and whispered a quiet prayer of thanks. Her son had finally seen the truth for himself. The Anderson estate in Ikoyi was silent but not somber. For the first time in years, peace settled across the sprawling marble floors and sun-warmed terraces like a long-lost friend returning home. Gerald sat beside the koi pond, sleeves rolled, feet bare, watching the fish swirl gently beneath the lily pads. His usually stern expression was softer now, contemplative. For once, he wasn't thinking about boardrooms or acquisitions or quarterly reports. He was thinking about how close he'd come to giving his future away, to someone who had never earned his trust, let alone his love. The memory of Vanessa's betrayal still stung, not just because of what she did, but because of what he didn't do. He hadn't listened to his instincts. He hadn't listened to his mother. And now she was finally home. Madame Gloria stepped out onto the patio, wearing a crisp white caftan, silver-gray hair wrapped in a silk scarf. Though she still walked with the elegant grace of the woman she'd always been, Gerald could see it, the faint bruises on her arms, the lingering sadness in her eyes. What Vanessa had done was public, but what hurt most was that he had brought her into their lives. He stood the moment she approached. "Mom," Gloria raised her hand gently. "Sit. You've been standing for me your whole life, Gerald. Sit now and let me speak." They both settled into the garden chairs, the scent of hibiscus floating between them. "I need to say I'm sorry," he began. She shook her head. "No, son. You needed to see it for yourself. I could have told you 1,000 times, and it wouldn't have mattered. But when a heart finally opens its own eyes, it never shuts the same way again." Gerald looked at her, his jaw tightening. "I should have protected you. I let her humiliate you. You didn't let anything happen. I chose to wear that disguise. I needed to know who Vanessa was when no one was watching. And now I know." She reached over and touched his hand. "You've always led with your heart, Gerald. You wanted love so badly, you were willing to lower the standards you lived by. That's not weakness. That's hope. But even hope needs boundaries." Silence fell for a moment, broken only by the bubbling water of the pond. He let out a breath. "It's strange. I had everything. Money, influence, recognition. But I kept feeling alone. I thought Vanessa was the answer." Gloria gave a small, knowing smile. "She was a mirror, not an answer. She showed you the version of love that's hollow, Now you'll know how to recognize the one that's full. Gerald's eyes fell to the stones beneath his feet. I don't even know what real love looks like anymore. His mother didn't answer immediately. She stood and walked over to a bench beneath the tree where she used to read when he was a boy. He followed her, sitting at her side. Real love, she began slowly, is not loud. It doesn't need an audience. It listens when no one else is speaking. It remembers small things. It puts your hand in water to test the temperature before letting you dive. It doesn't demand to be seen. It shows up in private, and that's where it's most beautiful. He looked at her. She continued. Do you remember when you were 10 and came home with a bruised lip after that boy at school punched you? He nodded. Tundi. I was angry at first, but when you told me you were protecting a boy with a limp who was being teased, I realized something. You've always protected people, even when it hurts you. She turned to him, her gaze warm. But it's time someone protects you, Gerald. He swallowed hard. I don't know if that kind of woman exists anymore. She does, Gloria said firmly. And when she comes, you won't need to convince her to stay. She'll choose to stay even after seeing all of you. The tired, the guarded, the grieving, the joyful. You won't have to beg for her attention. She'll pay it freely, and she won't flinch when she meets your scars. She'll honor them. Gerald felt his throat tighten. He hadn't cried in years, not since his father passed, but now sitting in the garden where he learned to walk, with the mother who had shielded him through every storm, the weight of it all began to lift. He didn't need Vanessa's approval. He didn't need to plaster his life in gold to find happiness. He just needed to start again. With honesty. The next week, Gerald made several quiet changes. The penthouse was cleared of all things Vanessa. Her brand partnerships were canceled, and every luxury label he once bought under pressure was returned or donated to Gloria's women's shelter. He gave his house staff a paid week off, choosing instead to make his own tea, read his own emails, and take morning walks through the Anderson Foundation Center, his late father's legacy, and the place Gerald had abandoned while chasing public image. And there, walking through one of the literacy rooms, he met Adora, a young woman who taught adult literacy to women once forced into street vending. She was calm, intelligent, soft-spoken. She wore her hair in a bun and her values on her sleeve. When Gerald asked her why she did the work she did, she smiled and said, because nobody deserves to be invisible. He paused. It was the same sentence he once used to describe his mother. Gerald Anderson stood at the edge of his rooftop terrace, overlooking the city skyline lit by the fading glow of dusk. The past weeks had unraveled his old life. What remained was uncertainty. He asked for the first time in years. Clarity. Across the city at the Anderson Foundation's women's shelter, Adora was closing the day's literacy class. The chatter of grateful students filled the room with subtle warmth. She had no idea that the man who stirred so much in her heart was also the billionaire whose life had just come crashing down. Gerald walked through the foundation grounds, inhaling the earthy scent of freshly planted flowers and aged wood. He paused when he saw Adora standing by a notice board. Their eyes met for the first time outside work. Good evening, Gerald said, voice softer than usual. Adora offered a shy smile. Good evening, sir. Everything set for tomorrow's workshop? He nodded, trying to anchor himself in a moment of simplicity. Yes, thank you for organizing everything. Their minutes of conversation were quiet. No performance, no expectation, just sincerity. He realized then that admiration didn't have to be loud to be deep. Meanwhile, Vanessa Odibi's world was crumbling. The brands had pulled endorsements, her social media influence had dwindled, and tabloids questioned her character. Pride wounded, she reached out to Gerald in a handwritten letter, one last attempt at salvaging their relationship. She claimed regret, pleaded for forgiveness, and promised change. But Gerald read the letter with clear eyes. The words felt rehearsed. The sincerity was missing. He chose not to respond. Back at home, Madame Gloria and her son prepared for a gala launching the foundation's expansion. It was the first time she saw her son during a phase of authenticity. Mother, I want you to be part of every decision now, he told her, holding her hand. She nodded with tears in her eyes. Thank you. In front of the gathered benefactors, Gerald spoke about love, not for luxury or accolades, but for compassion, dignity, and service. At his side, Gloria radiated pride, knowing her son had rebuilt himself from the inside out. Days later, Gerald invited Adora to a small gathering at his estate to introduce her to the foundation's board and his mother. She hesitated, aware of their social gap, but she accepted. In the garden, under soft lantern light, Gerald and Adora spoke candidly about their visions, their values, and even their past pains. Her simple grace and steadfast compassion contrasted with the performative elegance he once mistook for depth. Madame Gloria watched them from the side, arms crossed, smiling. After the conversation, Adora made her excuse. Gerald walked her to the gate. He said, "I'm glad you came." Adora's eyes glistened in the evening, the beginning of something real. Then came Vanessa's final appearance at a public event, planning to spin the narrative back in her favor. She arrived lavishly dressed, attempting to reclaim her image by aligning herself with high-profile guests. Madame Gloria approached her quietly backstage. "You don't belong here," she said softly. Vanessa's face paled. "Madame Gloria?" "Yes, and I forgive your ignorance, but do not mistake it for acceptance." Vanessa stared until she lost composure, slinking away while whispers circulated. Gerald watched Vanessa's staged intervention from the periphery, not with anger, but with resolve. Her world had lost its grasp on him. Instead, he found peace and offered truth and understated goodness. While love with Vanessa was loud and hollow, with Adora it was gentle and honest, and he was ready to see where that path would lead, with humility, with hope, and with real love. The Anderson estate felt different now. Gone were the photo ops, the curated perfection, and the people who only stayed close because of what Gerald Anderson could offer. In their place were moments of stillness, honesty, and quiet rediscovery. Gerald had spent years surrounded by noise, but in the silence he was starting to hear what truly mattered. And at the center of it was Adora. She didn't chase attention. She didn't demand spotlights. She simply showed up, with presence, kindness, and a clear understanding of who she was. It was early Saturday morning when Gerald called. His voice, though deep and confident, carried an undercurrent of something gentle. "Would you join me for a walk?" he asked. Adora hesitated. "Where?" "Somewhere without cameras," he said with a smile she could almost hear. "I promise." She agreed. They met near Lekki Conservation Center, away from the polished world of Banana Island. Gerald wore a simple black shirt and jeans. Adora wore a soft blue sundress. No heels, no luxury bags. Just themselves. They walked the wooden boardwalks in silence for several minutes, listening to the birds overhead. "I haven't done this in years," he admitted. "Why not?" Adora asked gently. He gave a short, breathy laugh. "Because I thought I was too important to slow down. I see now. I was too scared." Scared of what? Of being ordinary, of being unseen unless I was doing something impressive. Adora looked at him, thoughtful. "But people remember how you made them feel more than what you did." He turned to her then, eyes softened. "That's what I never got with Vanessa. She made me feel like a brand. But you..." He paused, then continued. "You remind me I'm human first." Adora didn't speak. She only smiled and kept walking. That night, Gerald returned to his study and found a note resting beside his whiskey glass. It was from his mother. "My son, when I first held you, I knew my greatest mission was not to raise a king of wealth, but a man of character. You have now become both, and more importantly, you've begun to choose people who water your soul, not just your image. I see the way you look at her. Adora. She is not loud, but she is loyal. Not decorated, but deeply rooted. Let your love grow quietly this time, without pressure, without pretense. I'm proud of you." "Mom." Gerald read it twice, then folded the letter and tucked it into the drawer where he kept his father's old cufflinks. His legacy now had a pulse again. And maybe a future. Meanwhile, Vanessa had not disappeared. Though disgraced, she still had a sliver of audience, and she planned to use it. She sat down for a one-on-one interview on a glossy online lifestyle show. Dressed in white with hair pulled back in a sleek bun, she presented herself as misunderstood. "I was under pressure," she said. "People forget that influencers are human too. I didn't know who the beggar was. I would never hurt someone on purpose." But it didn't land. What struck viewers most wasn't the words, but the absence of remorse. She never said, "I'm sorry." She never mentioned Madame Gloria by name. She didn't acknowledge Gerald or the pain she caused. The comments section was unforgiving. Still no accountability. "She hasn't changed." This isn't an apology, it's a rebrand. Within hours, brands that had been watching closely issued quiet statements reaffirming their distance. Vanessa had lost not just her man, but her influence. 1 week later, the Anderson Foundation hosted a private thank you dinner for staff and donors. Adora almost declined the invitation. She had never been comfortable in luxury settings. But Madame Gloria herself had called, gently insisting, "You belong in rooms like these, Adora. Don't let the velvet intimidate you." So she came. The dinner was held under soft lights strung across the estate's courtyard. Gerald wore a simple navy suit. Adora arrived in a deep green dress, hair swept into an elegant knot, her smile shy but radiant. The evening flowed with laughter and piano music. Toward the end, Madame Gloria stood and raised a toast. "To the ones who stayed when the crowd disappeared, and to those who remind us that dignity, not diamonds, is the true measure of value." When the clapping died down, Gerald approached Adora and extended his hand. "May I have this dance?" She hesitated for only a second, then placed her hand in his. They danced slowly, the rest of the world melting away. There was no proposal, no flashbulbs, no performance. Just movement, just breath. Just two people, finally finding the rhythm of something real. The following Monday, the media storm that had begun as a spark around Vanessa's public disgrace reignited. Only this time, it turned in a new direction. A popular Lagos gossip blog published an anonymous submission titled, "From Street Tutor to Society Climber, Meet Gerald Anderson's New Flame." The post included blurry photos of Adora entering and exiting the Anderson Foundation compound, some taken during volunteer hours, others sneakily captured during the private donor dinner. The article speculated that Adora was using her innocent background and foundation ties to seduce Gerald Anderson. It portrayed her as calculated, ambitious, and opportunistic. The comment section was brutal. "Another social climber in disguise. She looks too plain to be with someone like him. This is why rich men can't trust women from humble beginnings." Within hours, the post had thousands of views. Other blogs picked it up. Hashtags like #Foundation, Climber, and #Gerald's New Girl trended on social media. Adora sat at her tiny apartment that evening, frozen, phone in hand, reading words that pierced deeper than she could admit. She had done nothing wrong. And yet, she was now a headline. Gerald read the article 30 minutes after it went live. He paced his office like a caged lion, fury simmering behind his eyes. Vanessa's name wasn't mentioned, but he could feel her fingerprints all over the attack, disguised under anonymous tips, clever phrasing, and deflective tactics. He picked up his phone and called her. She answered on the second ring. "Gerald," she said sweetly, too quickly. "I was just about to call." "Don't," he said sharply. "You've sunk low before. But this is desperation. I didn't post anything. But you're behind it, and you know it." There was a long pause. "I warned you," she said quietly. "You were supposed to be mine, and you threw me away for someone who doesn't belong in our world." Gerald's voice turned to steel. "And yet she carries herself with more class than you ever did." He hung up. That night, Gerald visited Adora's apartment for the first time. He didn't send a car. He didn't call ahead. He simply showed up, dressed in a black polo and jeans, holding a bag of takeout food and 2 bottles of water. Adora opened the door slowly, visibly shaken. He stepped in quietly, placed the food on her small table, and looked at her without saying a word. I didn't expect this, she said finally, eyes shining. I should have. Gerald pulled out a chair. They see you as a threat, Adora, not because of what you've done, but because of who you are. You don't need anyone's money to walk with dignity, and people who rely on image hate that. She blinked slowly, her voice trembling. I didn't ask to be in the spotlight. I know. She sat across from him. What now? Now, he said, we eat, we breathe, and we don't let strangers define something they know nothing about. The next morning, Madame Gloria Anderson released an official statement. It wasn't long. It didn't mention Vanessa, but it was precise. The Anderson family does not entertain narratives rooted in cruelty, classism, or sensationalism. We believe in integrity, and that includes honoring those who serve our communities with humility and strength. Miss Adora is one of those people, and I, Gloria Anderson, stand with her. The statement sent ripples through the media. Several donors reposted it. A few journalists issued quiet retractions. Others started requesting interviews with Adora, but she refused them all. She wasn't interested in public defense. She was interested in peace. Across the city, Vanessa watched her plan crumble. She had thought the smear campaign would create enough doubt to make Gerald abandon Adora, but instead it had drawn people closer to her, people who valued kindness over perfection, authenticity over appearance. In a moment of bitter self-awareness, Vanessa realized something. She had never been truly loved. She had been admired, chased, decorated, but not loved. Not for who she was. Because even she didn't know who that was anymore. She turned off her phone, closed her windows, and, for the first time in years, cried without an audience. Weeks passed. The headlines faded. The hashtags died down. The world moved on, as it always did. And on a quiet Sunday, Gerald invited Adora to his estate, not for a party, not for a board meeting, but to meet someone special. Madame Gloria stood by the window as Adora entered. Her eyes lit up. So, this is the woman I prayed for. Adora blushed. I don't know what to say. Say nothing, Gloria replied, walking up to her. Just walk beside him. He's been carrying his world alone for too long. Adora turned to Gerald, who simply extended his hand. No fanfare, no grand promises. Just two people who had weathered noise, silence, and scrutiny, now standing in the calm that only truth could build. The ballroom at the Echo Imperial Towers shimmered in warm candlelight. A sea of dignitaries, philanthropists, and business leaders gathered for the Anderson Foundation's annual gala, the first in 3 years, and by far the most anticipated. Gerald Anderson stood tall in a black velvet tuxedo, a man not just known for his wealth anymore, but for his integrity. His journey over the past few months had been quieter than the headlines, but deeper than any press could capture. Tonight wasn't about damage control. It was about choosing the future and showing the world who he truly was. And he intended to do that with Adora by his side. When Adora arrived dressed in a floor-length emerald gown with soft curls cascading around her shoulders, the room subtly shifted. She wasn't the flashiest. She didn't wear diamonds. But there was something undeniably regal in her presence. People whispered, "That's her. She's the one Gerald's with now? She's stunning." Gerald noticed every head turn as he walked over to her. Without hesitation, he reached for her hand and gently brought it to his lips. "You look breathtaking," he said, eyes steady. She smiled, nervous but grounded. "I almost didn't come." "I'm glad you did," he whispered. "Tonight is for you." Across the room, Vanessa Odibi stood near the bar, dressed in white sequins and false confidence. She hadn't been invited, but she came anyway. Dignity, after all, had long been traded for attention. Her eyes locked on Gerald and Adora. She saw the way he looked at her, the softness, the quiet pride. It used to be hers, or so she thought. She reached for her glass of champagne, but her hand trembled. A woman beside her, a minor socialite, leaned in and whispered, "You should have treated him better." Vanessa didn't reply. There was nothing left to say. Later in the evening, Madame Gloria took the stage, commanding the room with grace and quiet authority. I have spent decades trying to make the world a little kinder for those who feel unseen. But tonight I am not the speaker you need to hear from. Instead, I give you my son. Gerald stepped up to the podium to thunderous applause. He looked over the audience for a moment, then paused at Adora, his eyes anchoring. When my father passed, he began, I believed I needed to fill his shoes by building an empire. I wore the right suits, said the right things, shook the right hands. But in the process, I forgot something. I forgot the power of being real. He paused. Recently, I was reminded of that by someone who has no title, no legacy, and no interest in being seen, unless it's to serve. She gave my mother her smile back. She made me see my own worth again. And she reminded me that love isn't about performance. It's about presence. He turned toward Adora and extended a hand. The entire room turned as she stood. Tonight, he continued, I ask the world to see not the surface, but the soul. I ask the world to meet the woman I love. Adora walked toward him, slowly, heart pounding. But when she reached him, everything stilled. He took her hand before the entire room and said simply, This is the woman I chose because she chooses me, not for what I have, but for who I am. In the back of the room, Vanessa clutched her empty glass. A man beside her murmured, Tough crowd tonight, huh? She didn't answer. Something inside her shifted, not in bitterness, but in brutal clarity. She walked toward the exit and paused. Her eyes met Madame Gloria's from across the ballroom. For a moment, Gloria thought she might approach. Apologize. Ask for forgiveness. But Vanessa only nodded. It wasn't a reconciliation, but it was perhaps the beginning of self-awareness. She turned and disappeared through the exit, alone. Later, under the moonlight of the Anderson estate, Gerald and Adora sat by the marble fountain, their shoes kicked off, her head resting gently against his shoulder. Did you mean every word? She asked softly. Every single one. She looked up at him, eyes bright. I don't need any of this. I know. I'd choose you if you lost it all. He kissed her hand. I believe you. From the balcony above, Madame Gloria watched them silently, her heart finally at rest. Her son had not just found love, he had found himself. 3 months later, the world had moved on. Trends had shifted. Influencers came and went. The news cycle had swallowed Vanessa Odibi's scandal and spit out the next big story. Yet in the privacy of his world, Gerald Anderson had found something far more lasting than attention. He had found a rhythm with Adora, and now he was ready to make it permanent. But not with a flash mob or a press announcement. Not with the towering spectacle his former self would have orchestrated. This time it would be quiet, personal, sacred. On a sunny afternoon in Victoria Island, Gerald pulled up to Adora's small apartment in a sleek black SUV. Not his driver, not a fleet, just him. Adora opened the door barefoot in a cotton-wrapped dress, her hair twisted up and damp from washing. She blinked, surprised. I thought you had meetings all day. I did, he said, stepping inside, but I rescheduled. I need to ask you something. She raised a brow. Is everything okay? Yes, he said softly, but I'd rather ask your mother first. Her mouth parted in disbelief. You want to? He nodded. I want to do this right. Adora's mother was a retired school teacher who had worked for over 3 decades. She lived in a modest home in Surulere and had raised her daughter with one simple belief. Character is louder than charm. She was waiting on the porch with a head wrap and newspaper when Gerald arrived with Adora beside him. She sized him up with cautious respect. Mr. Anderson, she said calmly, so you're the man who's stolen my daughter's peace of mind. He smiled and nodded. Only with her permission, ma'am. They sat, exchanged pleasantries, and drank Zobo under a small lemon tree. Then Gerald leaned forward, hands clasped. Ma, I came to ask for your blessing. I would like to propose to your daughter, not because she fits my life, but because she's taught me how to live. The older woman looked at him with quiet appraisal. Then her gaze drifted to Adora, who was trying very hard not to cry. After a long pause, her mother smiled. Then you have my blessing, because you've learned the lesson most men with your wealth never do. Real women are not impressed by your power. They are interested in your presence. 2 weeks later, in a private garden on the Anderson estate, surrounded by white peonies and jasmine, Gerald arranged a simple lunch under a tree Adora had once said reminded her of her childhood yard. There was no stage, no crowd, just a violinist playing softly under a gazebo. Adora arrived in a sundress, her hair pinned up in curls. Gerald met her with nervous eyes and a velvet box tucked into his palm. He didn't kneel immediately. He just looked at her. "I have been loved before," he said, "but never seen. Not like this. You saw the cracks, the fear, the silence, and stayed. I don't want to impress the world anymore, Adora. I just want to build one with you." Then slowly he knelt and opened the box. The ring was a simple, round diamond, elegant and timeless, just like her. "Will you marry me?" Adora blinked once, twice, then nodded through tears. Yes, Gerald. I will." Somewhere in a quiet apartment in Lekki, Vanessa sat at her desk, writing a letter she never intended to send. "Dear Gerald, you were the only man who didn't want to fix me, just understand me. I was too broken to recognize that. You found someone whole, someone good. I hope she teaches you everything I never could. If nothing else, thank you for showing me what love should have looked like. Sincerely, Vanessa." She folded it carefully and slipped it into a box labeled, "Things I've Let Go." For the first time in a long while, she opened a book instead of her phone. Gerald and Adora kept the engagement quiet for another month, focusing on plans that included community work, family visits, and a future rooted in sincerity. When they finally announced it, it wasn't on the cover of a magazine. It was a single photo, black and white, with Gerald holding Adora's hand as they walked barefoot along a beach. No captions, no filters, just presence. The world finally saw the man behind the empire, and the woman beside him. And for the first time, everyone agreed. He had chosen well. The sun filtered gently through linen curtains as soft jazz floated in the background. The Anderson estate, once a cold gallery of marble and silence, now pulsed with warmth. The scent of fresh roses from Madame Gloria's garden drifted through the open windows. Laughter echoed down the hall. Inside the breakfast nook, Adora Anderson, formerly Adora Odi, stood barefoot, whisking pancake batter with a messy bun and a tired but content smile. A delicate gold band glimmered on her ring finger, catching sunlight like a secret promise fulfilled. Behind her, Gerald wrapped his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. "I could get used to waking up like this," he murmured, voice husky with sleep. "You say that every morning," she teased. "And I mean it every time." They stayed like that a while. No rush, no pretense. Just breath and belonging. In the months after their wedding, Gerald quietly restructured the Anderson Foundation. It was no longer just a legacy project. It became a living organism. Under Adora's co-directorship, they launched a new literacy initiative named the Gloria program, offering education to women and elderly citizens who had once been overlooked by society. Madame Gloria stood proudly beside them at the launch event, dressed in flowing ivory, her silver hair catching every flash of the cameras. "I once stood on these streets disguised as a beggar," she said during her speech, "and I saw cruelty, but I also saw kindness. That is why we must build a world where worth is never measured by appearance." The crowd gave her a standing ovation. And in the back row, unnoticed, a woman in dark glasses clapped quietly. Vanessa. She stayed only a moment, then slipped out before anyone saw her tears. Sunday afternoons became sacred in the Anderson household. Not for business deals, not for influencers or gala invitations, but for family. Gerald and Adora would host simple lunches, grilled vegetables, jollof rice, lemonade in glass pitchers. Children from the Foundation's literacy program often dropped by with stories or drawings. Gloria's friends would come to read poetry in the garden. One afternoon, as they all gathered around the long wooden table, Gerald looked around, at the women laughing, the men passing plates, the clatter of forks, the joy that lived in every corner, and said softly, "This is wealth." Adora squeezed his hand beneath the table. In a quiet neighborhood near Yaba, Vanessa had begun volunteering anonymously at a center for young girls who had dropped out of school due to pregnancy or hardship. She never introduced herself by her last name. She never talked about the headlines. But the girls loved her stories. One day, a teenager named Miriam asked her, "Why do you help us?" Vanessa thought for a long time before answering. "Because I wish someone had helped me see what mattered before I lost everything." That night, she started writing her memoir, not for fame, but for healing. Gerald and Adora never returned to the social spotlight the same way again. They declined brand deals. They canceled all plans for a televised wedding documentary. They were building something deeper. One night, sitting by the fireplace with a baby blanket folded between them, Adora turned to Gerald. "Do you think we'll be good parents?" Gerald smiled, brushing a curl from her cheek. "I think our child will never doubt love. That's more than most people start with." The story of Gerald Anderson and the woman who kicked his mother became more than just a viral headline. It became a parable, a whispered reminder to every elite table and high-rise boardroom in Lagos. Character can't be bought, and love isn't loud. In time, nobody remembered the scandal, but everyone remembered the turnaround. And somewhere, tucked inside a dusty drawer in Madame Gloria's study, was an old wrapper and a pair of worn slippers. A quiet trophy from the day Truth stepped into the spotlight, wearing rags, and revealed the heart of a future queen. She kicked a beggar without knowing it was her billionaire fiancé's mother. But the woman who picked up the fallen basket without hesitation, she became his wife.